This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of Masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 446, part 2, entitled, "If I were a Masculist member of a Parliamentary Committee on Gender Equality." Carrying straight on. One of the main political aims of the Masculists is to wipe out fluffydom by wiping out fluffies who will be forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless and pariahed, cast out from society, spat at for being manslavers. So the male masculist half of the committee will be pushing for the spreading of masculist ideas throughout society, taught in the media, in the schools, in books, in debates, in private dinner parties, etc. Masculism, bi-consciousness, reform of the divorce courts, for example, no alimony, joint custody for kids, no 50-50 split of the wealth and stuff, etc. The legislation of the para, the menfairing of the many gender laws, for example, no single-sex conscription, equal punishment for equal crimes, etc., will all become common knowledge, hopefully not too many years from now, as masculist ideas spread throughout the world, thanks largely to the efforts of the Masculists and MGTOWs on the internet. A male ERA, that's Equal Rights Amendment, will be fought for. That will, for example, make it a criminal offence to discriminate on the basis of sex. For example, YouTube would be legally prosecuted for its discrimination against the Masculists and MGTOWs due to YouTube's deletion of Masculist and MGTOW channels from YouTube's video platform. The CEO of YouTube, an ardent monoconscious feminist, promotes feminist channels and deletes masculist channels, as YouTube did to my masculist channel and to dozens of other masculist and MGTOW channels. Women like that will go to jail in the near future as masculist anti-discriminatory laws begin to really bite. This type of monoconscious bigotry is based on ignorance of masculist ideas, since these MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, know nothing of masculism, hence suffer the delusion that gender oppression is a one-way street, since the only gender political oppression they have heard of all their young lives is feminist. So it's no wonder that they are feminazi bitchy towards men. By bothering to learn some masculist ideas, brackets, for example, that women have a half-century career window, so must work, so must be raised to be FIPs, so they do not become fluffy parasites, living off the money and labour of a man, making her a hated, fluffy manslaver, thus committing a major gender crime, close brackets. Women will become much less feminazi bitchy, much less unconsciously feministically arrogant towards men, and realise that women can oppress men too, which is an idea that will sober them. I read that, in the UK, many young men have already been strongly influenced by the current masculist and MGTOW critiques of the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts, and know how toxic they are to divorcing husbands, so now care more about the level of fitness of a potential girlfriend than they do about her looks, which is a very strong statement. These young British men are looking at these young British women with a very cold eye, asking themselves, quote, "Is this woman a fluffy or a true FIP? Will she expect to manslave me? Has she bothered to get a career-competent education? Does she have the mentality and moral expectation to be a FIP, and emo FIP, that's equal moral obligations, to be a FIP?" End quote. Millions of young men are now already refusing to give young women their sperm because they wipe their hands of marriage and paternity, because they refuse to face a 1 in 4 chance of losing their kids, house, half their wealth and stuff, and pay alimony to a hated parasitic fluffy who didn't bother to FIP up, who expects to be a expects to be able to live off the money and labour of a man. That is, she sees herself as a fluffy, man-slaving parasite. Such young women are already being forced to rot on the shelf in today's world. Young women now are increasingly panicking because they are experiencing, with boyfriend after boyfriend, that these young men refuse to give them their sperm, thus forcing these young women to be babyless, which is driving them crazy. As masculist ideas spread, more and more young men will put pressure on the politicians to menfair the gender laws, to reform the divorce courts, to bring in the para, etc. There are even bigger issues involved that are intimately linked to the rise of masculist consciousness, that is, the global warming problem and the crash of the birth rate with its threat of population annihilation. These gender politicians in the Gender Equality Committee will need to be very conscious of the above two bigger issues. Today's divorce courts are so toxic for men that already in today's world, in many countries, 2/3 of young men refuse to marry and reject paternity due to their rejection of facing a 1 in 4 chance of losing their kids if they have them. So they choose instead to live the MGTOW lifestyle, men going their own way, and spend their money on themselves. In the short term, this may be a good thing, since it will drastically reduce the world population from the current figure of about 8 billion to, say, 500 million, thus solving the pollution and global warming problems. But this population reduction problem cannot continue for many generations, because if it does, then we wipe ourselves out. In Seoul, the capital city of South Korea, the birth rate today is a frightening 0.64 children per woman. Obviously, this cannot continue, so the politicians will be forced to accept masculist ideas, since they will be forced to detoxify the divorce courts, making them men fair, so that men are prepared to be fathers again. By making the divorce courts men fair necessitates the FIPPing of women and the passage of the para. Reforming the divorce courts and legislating the para will cause profound changes in society, throwing out the traditional gender roles of the housewife mother and the breadwinner father, and replacing them with the FIP Society model, where both sexes are raised to be FIPs or pay a very heavy price. For example, imagine in some high school class, a particular girl gets the reputation in her social circle that she has chosen to study fluffy crap majors, that she will end up with a fluffy crap diploma that will make her a fluffy as an adult. Once she gets the reputation of being a fluffy in her social circle, that will be the kiss of death for her in terms of getting a man. No young men who are well informed of masculist ideas will go near her. She will be shunned, spat at, reviled, cast out, pariahed as a vile, man-slaving, bloody fluffy. As masculist ideas spread, young men will put tremendous moral pressure on young women to FIP up or suffer terribly, as no man, no quality man, in brackets, whom she really wants to mate with, to have quality DNA from a quality man for her kids, so that her kids have superior DNA to hers, close brackets, will go near her. Such rejection by masculistic quality men will be excruciatingly painful for her. So we can expect a flood of young women into calculus and into science classes in the near future as masculism spreads. And young men expect and demand that young women FIP up or rot on the shelf, seen as being future manslavers and hence gender criminals to be spat at. Once the population has really fallen, it will be the role of the governments to push for the re-establishment of a birth rate over 2.1 children per woman, that is the replacement rate, so that we do not wipe ourselves out. So the Gender Equality Committee will need to push women to adopt an MCT model. That is the Mother Career Timeline, which for upper middle class women goes as follows. An upper middle class woman gets her master's degree at age 23, then works for 5 years, during which time she marries, then has her first kid at age 29, her second at age 31. Then 4 years later, as the second kid is off to kindergarten, she returns to her career with a career window of half a century, since her female life expectancy is 85. It is this basic reality, in brackets, that is the female career window of half a century, close brackets, that is behind the masculist push for women to get off their fat parasitic asses and FIP up, since as the masculists say, quote, now that women can work, they must work. Anything else is manslavery, and to masculists, manslavery is slavery, and hence a war issue. If there is no menfairing of the gender laws, for example with the divorce courts legislating the para, given that women have the mara but men don't have the para, etc., then there will be a sex war, since no culture can tolerate one father in 4 being financially crucified and having his life ruined in the hated, fluffy feminist hypocrite dominated divorce courts. What is happening in the divorce courts is a war issue for men. Feminists, women, society really need to understand this. Divorcing fathers are becoming so full of hate that there is growing talk of a sex war amongst militant masculists. Thus, the members of the gender equality committees in countries around the world have a major responsibility to not only address feminist and masculist issues equally, but have a much bigger responsibility to solve the global warming problem and to ensure that whole populations do not wipe themselves out, as we are all currently doing. Thus, gender equality committees are of critical political importance in the near future. If this flyer convinces you of that, and that hopefully one of you reading/watching this is inspired to become that Wilberforce/Garrison champion, the Lenin hero, who pioneers the creation of gender equality committees in parliaments that genuinely deal with both feminist and masculinist issues equally and fairly, which is far from being the case today, in today's deeply monoconscious, gender-biased and masculistically ignorant world. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 440 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.